Welcome to the Virtual CPA Success Show, where we're 100% focused on helping service-based businesses achieve success. Are you a business owner interested in learning how to scale your business? Has your business reached over $1 million in annual revenue? Then this podcast is for you.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. We are very excited about today's guest. One of the most common questions we get from both our clients, and we've actually got a couple emails in our inbox about what to do a topic on, is what's going on in the industry? What are you guys seeing in the industry? And I think there's no one better to talk about this subject than Tom Beck from SOTA. SOTA does a lot of research in this area, and they just actually did their 2020 research, so we're going to dive into that. And then he's also done some pricing models as well and pricing studies. So there's going to be a lot of industry-specific knowledge that I know all of our listeners are really excited for. So Tom, before we get down that path, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and talk a little bit about SOTA?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, thanks guys for having me. I appreciate it. I'm Tom Beck. I'm calling in here from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm executive director at SOTA. SOTA is a global member-based organization for founders and owners, primarily of digital-centric agencies, digital marketing agencies, digital product design studios, content production companies. We've been around since 2007. In our purpose, our primary mission is to help our members, the leadership teams, become a little bit more connected, a little smarter about running their business. And our membership spans the globe, so we have around 100 member agencies in 20 countries. And so the community can really kind of share knowledge from both a regional perspective, but also a kind of agency-focused perspective. And so that's what we're up to. And as Jamie mentioned, one part of our program, over the course of the year is to do a number of benchmarking studies on various aspects of the agency business. And I'm excited to be here with you guys today to talk about some of that stuff.
Sounds great. Hey, Tom, real quick, what would you say the range from your average client that you're dealing with there that's in SOTA? Would it be from $0 to 100,000, or what's the revenue range?
Yeah, so SOTA's primarily, I would call small and mid-sized agencies. So the bulk, like 80% of our members would be in the, we'll say 5 to 10 to 15 million in U.S. revenue, net revenue. And then we have a good handful of agencies smaller than 5 million. And then we've got sort of a long tail of agencies who are 20, 30, 50, we've even got a couple $100 million agencies in SOTA, but those are rare, and those have been members for many years, and they've grown their businesses, and through acquisition and some other ways. But yeah, the sweet spot for SOTA is, around 10 million in US revenue.
Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, Tom, this is like the first time I've ever seen you without a beanie on right now, and I'm so disappointed. Your hair's done. You look nice.
Jody doesn't understand how cold it is here in Michigan. Plus, you gotta maintain the street cred. So I needed to wear the beanie, but I told you I'd clean up for today's session.
I do appreciate that for sure.
You should have told the same to Jody. Unfortunately, we didn't. So. Yeah, and so both Jody and I have been to SOTA events, and I definitely want to plug them, and they're amazing. I know it's been a little bit different with all the COVID stuff going on, but I know we met down there and we've been to a couple, and awesome events, great information that's passed. And I know a lot of times this research that we're going to talk about today is reviewed at those events, and would definitely recommend any of our listeners, once things get back up to normal, attend an event, because it really is helpful, and there's you can get a lot out of it.
Yeah, just kind of curious, Tom. I know it's an invitation only type of
yeah.
But do you guys just have events that are available to really the open public, or is everything very closed when it comes to your events?
Yeah, most of them are closed. I mean, it is the purpose of the community is really internal facing. Mm-hmm. And so most of the programming and the work we do is specifically within the membership. But we do a few public events, and we do one bigger one called the SOTA Academy. Which is basically track-based content across 10 or so agency disciplines, so technology, strategy, operations, even agency leadership, sales and marketing, etc. And so, we're hopeful that in 2022 we'll be able to bring that back. We're definitely not going to try it for 2021. It's a bigger undertaking for us, and I think things will be uncertain for a long enough portion of this year. But 2022, we should be back with the Soda Academy, and that could be a good opportunity for listeners on this call who aren't Soda members but might want to tap into some of this peer network for a great few days of knowledge exchange.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, perfect. Yeah, love it.
Great. So let's dive in. So I don't want you to read numbers to us because even as accountants, we don't want to listen to that. But let's give us some information. Give us what are some of the trends you're seeing? What are some of the most exciting things you're seeing, or what's just the commonalities that you found?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll talk a little bit about our tracking study that we did last year. In 2020, we do an annual digital outlook study, and we had actually wrapped that one up in around December of 2019 as an outlook for 2020. And then as COVID started to play out, we thought, look, this is going to be interesting just to do a tracking study this year at 2 or 3 points during the year to see how agency leaders are actually navigating the year, what their performance is looking like, what are some of the things they're doing operationally to wrestle with the uncertainty or maybe other pressures they have on their business. So we ended up fielding 3 studies, one at the end of March, March to the first week in April. So kind of right at the beginning of when quarantines were rolling out. We did another one right at the end of Q2, so late June into the first week in July. And then we did the last tracking study, in late Q4, wrapping up in December 15th or something. And I think that what's interesting, a couple takeaways from
that was ingenious, by the way. That great timing, great thought, way to act. It was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks. And it was, it's a lot of the credit goes to the community here too, because we are always looking for ways that we can share some things that we're doing in our business that might be helpful. And we probed essentially 3 areas. It would be kind of the general outlook and optimism for the year from a financial performance perspective. And piece 2 was around kind of operational changes or operational decisions people were making to wrestle with the year. And then the 3rd area would be kind of outlook then into as we wrapped up this year, outlook coming into 2021. I guess let's share just a couple top level things. I think in one hand, 2020 was not as bad of a year as many people imagined it was going to be in March, certainly. Yep. So we saw, confidence in the outlook for the year just absolutely crater. We came into the year that, about 80% of, people in our studies said they were, optimistic about 2020 and optimistic that it would be better financial performance in 2019. That number dropped to something like 30% by the end of March, So people were very uncertain.
I'm surprised it's that high, actually.
I know. I know. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's always in these studies, on both sides of the equation, you're like, who are this 30% who are actually sitting there going like, yeah, this is going to be a great year.
The healthcare industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're serving healthcare companies.
It's true. We do have, definitely in our community, we have a good chunk of them who do a lot of work in high tech. So they work with Apple and they work with Facebook and they work with YouTube. And I know that a lot of those businesses remained confident, But what was interesting is I think as we went across the year, you saw that stabilize more. And certainly confidence never recovered to the levels that we would see. And even most of the members that I talked with who even ended up having a good year, expressed that it was volatile and uncertain throughout the year. So they ended up in a good place, but at each kind of checkpoint along the year, they were going like, I just don't know. Like, I'm not certain, we had a decent quarter, but I don't know if we'll have one next year. So that, that changed a lot. And I give agencies a lot of credit for navigating the year. I mean, we saw people make quick decisions. Some, they adjusted staff sizes very quickly, just even as a proactive measure, which is, terrible for people who lose their job, but for business owners who are tasked with keeping a viable entity, and making sure that their business thrives, these were smart decisions. People protected their cash positions. People aggressively went after PPP loans, and I think in our studies, we had 80+% of respondents had received some level of PPP funding. And I think that was a big, that was a big cushion. So a lot of credit goes to agencies, I think, for making quick moves to be nimble and take the situation seriously. That decision making revealed a lot of areas where agencies were softer than they thought they were. So we asked a lot of questions around where they felt prepared to address a crisis like this, and then where they ultimately thought they were, weaker. And there were some things like places like culture and or your ability to work remotely, that was all easy for agencies. They moved that, so they were really confident in that. Interestingly, from a financial perspective, a lot of agencies were very worried about cash positions, and they were very worried about financial visibility, just even their fundamental reporting metrics. Like, can we actually do, can we do what we need to do to project where we think we're going to be?
Right.
And
modeling is huge.
while many still struggled with that, those numbers actually improved over the year, that people said, we actually were better than we thought we would be. But on the flip side, agencies were weaker than they thought they would be, and in executive level, decision making long term. They thought that they would knock out the decisions they needed to really quickly, and that became more of a labor. Sales and marketing, proactive sales and marketing, business development was continued to be a big issue that agencies said, like, we just aren't as prepared for a big contraction in revenue. And things like knowledge management internally as an agency, we have people go, or we get an aspect of how we work kind of cut off, and they didn't feel as confident there.
I think all three of those sound like they tie pretty closely to what you mentioned about staffing. Like, I think when a lot of times when you cut staffing, the owner's like, well, I can do our BD, or like, they're gonna step in and do different roles. And so some of those executive initiatives they have probably fell to the wayside because they're doing work they're not used to doing. So those three areas you mentioned all made sense to me, because those are areas I could see, and I have seen owners like step in when they need to, and just like kind of leave those things to the side and say, okay, that'll happen in a year when we're a little bit better off. So that those make
exactly. Well, and on the flip side, it's like those are areas that when things are going well, you don't tackle proactively.
Yeah.
And so things like getting your business development pipeline really cooking for a future, that you don't know about yet. When people go, oh, we're booked, we got projects for the next, we're not constantly investing in the project that we need to win 6 months from now or a year from now. But same thing with things like knowledge management or getting your financial operations in order. Those are things you continue to kick off until, put off into the future until you really start to feel pain there.
So do you think the silver lining there is people were able to kind of do a deep dive into their own business and really kind of figure out what where the holes are at and how to fix them, not only temporary but long term?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the silver lining of any kind of crisis like this, is it forces you to look at aspects of your business that aren't performing, or that are vulnerable. That are vulnerable to underperformance when crisis hits. And so, I think the challenge for agency leaders is to continue to sustain that mentality even once times get good again, right? Because that's, especially in smaller businesses, we all run really lean staffs, and we're all, we're certainly focused on the future as business leaders, but, it's usually not the 6 month, a year future. It's a shorter term than that. So I think this was a good lesson. It was also good just market pressure testing for agencies in terms of their positioning, their value of the service offering, the strength of their client portfolio, heck, even the diversity of their client portfolio. I mean, as you guys know, some of the agencies that were hit hardest were ones that were overexposed to a particular client sector or just to one individual client. And again, we all know intuitively that overconcentration in one client or overconcentration in one sector can be great when it's performing well and can be very efficient, but can be an Achilles heel when the market turns. So again, it's kind of force people to really evaluate that. And just speaking from personal experience, I used to run an agency for many years, and we found ourselves in that position, several times throughout my tenure, and then lost big clients. And each time you come out of it a little smarter, and you work a little harder to go, we need to get this balance right.
Yeah, we always say as leaders or owners, you have to eliminate risk, right? That's kind of like the owner's responsibility, right? To eliminate risk or hit the risk head on and figure out how to solve it. And one thing we talk about is a lot is niching your business.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a dual-edged sword there, right? Because if you niche your business in the wrong area and something like this happens, well then you're not in a good position. So you got to be able to pivot pretty quickly with that niche. So I guess being careful on the niche is the thing to think about. For those that were in the leisure industry, they really got hit hard. For those in the restaurant industry, also got hit hard. But those in healthcare, like you're saying, excelled.
Those in healthcare, those in
food in general.
Food in general, those in high tech in particular. So it is the challenge, because a niche strategy is a good one typically, but you have to be aware of the risks that you're taking. And Jody, to your point, it's when a problem hits, be more prepared, to pivot or have a plan. And again, I was just really impressed across the agency community that I work in, to see people address it. I mean, we had one agency member who was heavy travel and hospitality, probably lost 80% of their revenue over a 12-week period.
Wow.
And then, they, over the next 6 to 8 months, they found ways to pivot the business and close the year out really pretty strong, and that's just a credit to, I think, the
awesome.
the ingenuity in this business. But the other thing I wanted to mention just quickly is a interesting takeaway, I guess, from the year is, guys, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but, we really, from a financial performance perspective for 2020, I think we saw a broader spectrum of financial performance across the agency community than we would see in a typical year. And that's not surprising. There's the adage that all boats rise in the tide. So when the economy is strong, most agencies, unless they have a fundamental problem in their business, they're performing okay, right? This year we saw the wheat separated from the chaff, so to speak. And what we ended up with in this scenario is about 30% of agencies in our study had really pretty strong financial years. So they had revenue growth, they had profit, they were profitable, and they saw improved margins. So and they may, for some of them, it was their best year on record. For others, maybe not their best year, but a strong year. But on the other end of the spectrum, we saw about 30% of agencies come in at break even or a net loss for the year, and that's a significant number. We typically would not see that many in this kind of pool of studies that we do, that many agencies struggle. Right. And I think that it goes, Jody, to what we were just talking about. Some of it is just wrong place, wrong time, in terms of your client concentration or your mix or whatever the case is. But in other cases, I think that the heightened pressure from 2020, it exacerbates the many other trends and challenges that exist in the agency market right now. So, we've got rate pressure. It gets more competitive every year. Our costs continue to go up because, great talent is hard to find and costly. So those problems all existed in 2019. But because the economy was strong, a lot more agencies were able to skate by. You hit a tough year like we did in 2020, and I think it really reveals the agencies that are really well run, that have a really strong value proposition, and really have a strong place in the market. And
I would also add to that a strong cash position too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Totally agree, because there's short-term volatility that if you're not in a position, you may come out of that great 3, 4, 5 months down the road, but if you're not in a position to weather that storm, it doesn't matter what your value proposition looks like in 6 months, right?
Right.
You're wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Exactly.
even with the cash position too, like I know we had some companies that had a really good cash position, and they were looking for ways to take advantage of this. Like, and again, not in a bad way, but in a good way. Like,
Yeah.
okay, what are some actions I can take to make my business stronger when other businesses aren't doing so well? You know, is there some people I can hire that I wouldn't normally hire because of their talent levels high, and they, you know, another company let them go. So I think that's another thing about having that cash position. It gives you the advantage to be able to make those decisions you wouldn't if you were struggling for cash.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we saw within some of the, I isolated those, and we'll call them high performers for 2020, but kind of isolated those. And, you know, they were definitely more focused on things like talent and talent acquisition and business development than the rest of the general community. Um, and I think that's part of just their mentality of, talent and great work is part of producing, a really defensible niche, in the agency world. That's not all of it, right? You can produce great work and run,
Yep.
run a terrible financial operation and you're not going to be there. But I think if you've been focused on that differentiation and the caliber of your work, and you've been smart enough from a financial perspective, I think these agencies find themselves in a, their outlook improved much more quickly over the course of the year. We're getting into stuff like coming into 2021, something like 85% of the top performers from 2020 we're planning to hire in the early part of this year, whereas only maybe 50% or a little bit less of the general pool we're planning to hire. So they're also, even if they had a slightly down year by their standards, they're bouncing back more quickly.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Kind of pivoting a little bit. I mean, we talked about pricing a little bit, and you mentioned you just got done with a price study. Can you kind of give us a little hint on what's in there without ruining it for those that are in the soda community there?
Yeah, for sure. So we've done, for the audience, we've done a pricing and rate card study. Oh gosh, probably for 8 years or something like that. In the typical rates card study, just goes roll by roll on the rate card, and then we get across the community anywhere from 70 to 80 agencies to participate in this. And when we wrapped it up this year, a couple things that bubbled to the surface that I think were interesting. I mean, one is that this rate card study really shows, even from our community perspective, I think that the stagnation in rates in general across the agency landscape. So, we saw something like, from 2016 to, we'll say, the end of 2020, which is when this really wrapped up. So over the course of 4 years, like across the board, rates had only grown by about 7%. So 4 years, 7% in 4 years, not, that's not significant,
Right.
not significant growth. We also look at, even things like, over the last 18 months, if you've been able to raise your rates even across the board or for, say, isolated roles or projects, and again, we're only in a scenario where maybe 30% are saying, yeah, we were able to raise our rates. And it's not that agencies continue to find ways to be profitable with how they run their projects, how they price their projects, in smarter ways, all of that. But it shows that any of the wiggle room, I guess, that we would have from a rate perspective, and that gives us a little more ability to be sloppy in our operations. It's like we're losing a little more of that every single year, and so you start just looking at it from a business perspective and going, I don't have any fluff or slop in my cost model, in the way that I price these things. And it's like, so we need to run projects profitably. We need to estimate them in a smart way. We need to really control our cost structure, relative to our revenue, do a great job about forecasting where our business is going to be, because all of that is your margins are getting compressed every year. So And I know that probably a lot of listeners on this call, feel that way and they see that, but we definitely see that in the data.
Mm-hmm.
So
For sure. And we always tell people that it's really not, it's not what you charge, it's really what you're realizing from what you charge. You're talking about being sloppy. That's where 90% of all of our losses come from, really being sloppy from your price to what you actually realize from the job. And it's pretty sad because there's a lot. I mean, 10% is what we say. Hey, if you're billing $200,000 or $200 per hour, you want to at least realize $180 there. That's 10%.
yeah,
So in between 180 and 200, not bad.
yeah,
Obviously you'd want that as small as you can, right? But that's in the safety zone. Really, anything more than that, that could be detrimental to the entire team, and that's where you see the big margin drops. It's not in your marketing, it's not in your costs, it's not in your your administrative costs, anything like that. It's in your cost of sales there. It's in that
yeah,
difference between that standard. And so when you're not seeing prices increase, because you'd like to see prices increase every year because you're giving it your employees raises, right? So you would think
yeah,
that would kind of go one for one, but if you're not seeing that and you're still giving your employees raises there, something's got to give there. And it's got to be tightening up your margins, maybe automating things that you had people do, or maybe, more transparency with the project manager and the finances, or, there's got to be something there that you've got to look for to improve that difference, that gap, because like you're saying, your prices are going to stay flat pretty
yeah.
much. 7% is not flat, but it's not like a roller coaster ride. It's not like a hockey stick,
No.
curve. You got to make sure that you're tightening everything else up and really watching, that difference there.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's just it applies more pressure to aspects of the business. And I mean, there's a lot of people who founded agencies that got into it because they love the creative work, they love the strategy work, and for many, many years they're able to create really successful businesses, because they can sell enough work at their prices and do good work, and that's great. Um, that's not really enough. That's not
Yeah.
really
Right.
enough.
Right.
You have to have a smart enough production, finance, and sales capability to really be profitable in this kind of, to be consistently profitable in this environment. And again, the great news is many agencies are finding ways to do that, and the market's growing. I mean, there's lots of great opportunity out
Yep.
there. And at these rates, as you said, Jody, at these rates, you can still make a really good margin
Yep.
if you're running your business well, if
Yeah.
you're running capacity well, if you're estimating and running projects effectively, if you're controlling the cost of your SG&A staff relative, to your
Right.
billable staff and all of that. So there's still plenty of levers to do that. It's just that you really, really cannot ignore, you really cannot ignore those or perform poorly in those areas, because you're just going to find a declining business every year. I think unless you really are, seeing really strong growth every year that can somehow mask that.
Right.
Well, it's tough, yeah, because you see, obviously if your rates aren't going up very much, then you're obviously paying your people more each year. So you really have to be able to figure that out. And that's where I think, the organization and all those things you just talked about, it's more about, okay, what is our system for being efficient? What is our system for hiring correctly? What is our system for having us be able to make quick decisions, like we talked about very early on in the podcast. So those are all the really important things, because again, if you're only able to increase your price 7% over 4 years, I guarantee you're paying your people more than a 7% increase over the same
Absolutely.
4
I mean,
years.
cost of inflation. Yeah, cost of
So
inflation hits that. I
yeah,
guarantee your payroll
yeah,
has gone
exactly.
up. And one more thing I'll add, Jamie, and I know we're probably getting close to time, but
Yeah.
another facet of this, and it comes out in the study, but I think agencies are experimenting a lot with their pricing models. And so we looked across the SOTA portfolio, and we're seeing a big mix of project-based pricing, increment-based pricing, and by that I mean just deliverable-based pricing, or for agencies who work on kind of an agile model, sprint-based pricing. We're seeing a lot more time and materials, day rate-based pricing, kind of like how consultancies would work. More maintenance, or more maintenance recurring services pricing. And so I think there's in most of our agencies would use, their revenue is a mix of 2 to 3 to 4 different pricing models.
Right.
And I think that, some of that's just driven by the client, but some of that's also driven around ways to reduce risks.
Mm-hmm.
So, certain kinds of clients and certain kinds of project types will have less risks with different kinds of pricing models.
Mm-hmm.
So for instance, if it's a project that you've done a million times and you're stamping them out, and you can put some project-based pricing on that you can deliver on, it's
Mm-hmm.
great. Your margins can actually be higher there. For projects that have greater uncertainty or more moving parts, you get into a time and materials day rate, or even some retainer, and you can create just a little bit more safety or a little less risk in what you end up realizing on that project. So I guess that's just the last thing I'd leave you guys with on the pricing piece. Is I do see a lot more experimentation on pricing, on pricing models and kind of project structures is one of the ways to manage risk and to try to be as profitable as they can in the current environment.
Yeah, Tom, I'd say that reoccurring revenue is huge. The higher you can make that as a percentage of your overall revenue, the less risk you have, right? Because if you miss that big project, it's easier to scale down to 60% of what you're doing versus 15 or 20, and be profitable in the end. So I think the reoccurring revenue is the huge one out of all of that. For those companies that really focused on that prior to pandemic, it really carried them through a lot. For those that didn't, maybe it's a great time to refocus and take a look at what they can do now to create a recurring revenue model, at least with 30% or more of the overall revenue.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And in terms of just planning for capacity planning. Certainly, that makes things like capacity planning more predictable. The more predictable and better you are at capacity planning, typically the tighter your numbers are going to be from a project operations perspective. So this is something I would encourage the listeners to look at in their own business if they're not doing it. Because I also think that the marketing buyers are getting more savvy in terms of understanding there's lots of different ways now to engage with agencies and creative services companies, and structuring a financial model can be more favorable for the client too, even in certain scenarios.
They felt the same issues, right? If it's predictable, then it's a lot easier to control on their end, a lot easier to budget, and the last thing is going to be cut versus something that could be a huge up, during the pandemic could have a huge expense, easier to cut, versus something that's, the continuous thing. So I think it's overall, it's a win-win for both the client and the agency, for sure.
Predictability is huge. Like, as we know, when we build forecasts, like the more you can predict, the easier it is, and knowing those costs are. And I think that what I really appreciate about what you said there, Tom, is I think pricing can be different for different people, right? I think there's a couple of things you really have to stand behind it, you really have to believe in it, and you really have to be able to sell it. So like, I think how many events have all of us been to where that question comes up is what pricing is best? And I think the answer, it depends on who you are and what you stand for and what works best for you. So I think that, there's great truth in that. And so as you predicted, Tom, we are right up against time here. So I'm going to give you a quick
question. Flew by.
It did fly by. Always does. Yeah. Give you a quick chance here, both you guys, to give me any final thoughts. A lot of good information here. I know I really enjoyed hearing it, and I'm sure our listeners will but any final thoughts out there?
Tom, biggest thing I've got for you is the beanie. You look.
I promise you, Jody. In our one-on-one meetings, I'll definitely bring the beanie back. So
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate it a lot.
It sounds like we need to have you on again, Tom, and you can wear a beanie this time so everybody knows.
You guys will make me do that in July, though, and then I'll look even stupider than I typically am. So no, nothing on my end. I appreciate it, and I know it can be a tough business out there, but like I said, I've just been I've been so excited to see how creative leaders have adapted in the last year. And I think it's, we need to look at it as a good wake up call in our business, that we're getting, good signals from the market in our external environment, that we need to be serious about, where we're taking our business and the pivots we might need to make. And, we're fortunate to get those signals and have a chance to move our business in the right direction. So, and I'm seeing lots of agencies doing that, and I think they'll come out on the other end of this much stronger and in a better position for, say, the next 10 years of their agency cycle.
Yeah, I couldn't have said any better, Tom. That's you hit it right on the nose. There's a lot of opportunity that can be taken from this, and I think if for those having their eyes open, we'll definitely take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think they always say if you look at a business over any period of time and say what they're doing now, you can look back at any mistake or any problem and say that's why we started doing this. And I think the pandemic is just another example of that. So definitely appreciate having both you guys on the show. A lot of good information here.
All right. Well, thanks. We'll see you soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Enjoy this episode? Visit our website at summitcpa.net to get more tips and strategies for achieving virtual CPA success. We're here to be a resource in this ever-changing industry.